All right, so I'll move to the next bullet that I have, and I'm just going to call it the infamous target lock. So, um, to avoid any because we're not trying to, I don't want to cause any drama or confusion. I actually want to bring this up because this is something that I wanted to learn from, but B, I think this is a situation that people will sometimes run into, and we should find, at least in advice ways, how is the best way to pursue finding what the real answer should be or what you should do in these scenarios. And then when you do disagree with the judge, when you should or shouldn't do something, right? That's probably what we're going to attempt to cover in this little segment. So the target lock in question is, so I was on stream on day 2 against Knuckles, and we had a scenario where, and I'm just saying this from my perspective, since I don't know exactly because I haven't watched the stream, but I'm just like, okay, this is mentally what was going through my head. So we had a scenario where my shuttle was shooting at a droid that it took a target lock on turn 1 because it was Jendon. And I rolled 3 dice, and it was a hit blank focus. And I said, okay, acknowledging the dice roll, and I took the 2 dice that were not hits out of the box. And I looked at the board, and I saw that I have a target lock, which is different because now we're using different components since we're on street. And as I turned back to the dice, Andrew had taken the dice and begun to roll, and I said, wait, I need to spend my target lock. And at that point, I hadn't even looked left to see what the dice result was. It came to well, I've already rolled my dice. You can't modify. So I called the judge over because I was like, really? I took this target lock turn 1. So a judge came over and was like, well, you said okay, so your opponent gets to roll dice. And I said okay, acknowledging that's a bad roll. Okay, what am I going to do, or what are my options? What can I do? And I looked at the board. So my advice to other people before anything like that, just allow your opponent a moment or two to evaluate the situation because they may have modifiers, or give them the opportunity to have a missed opportunity, I guess you could say. But I'm curious what you would do in that scenario, just given from my perspective. Like, it doesn't have to, this isn't taking sides or anything.
So yeah, well, let me step back a second. So I didn't see this, right? So all I have is your side of the story, right? So that's the story I'm going to go with.
Sure.
So I'm going to focus less on what Knuckles, and I'm going to focus on your judge interaction,
sure.
right?
Yep.
So I'm going to focus on all right, so the judge tells you well, you said okay. So my reaction is pause. I said, oh, okay. I didn't say okay, roll the dice. I said okay, the words.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean anything. I didn't say okay. Maybe I was going to say okay, I'm going to spin this target lock. You don't know okay anything, right? So right now, again, I don't know context. So I'm just inserting my statement here.
No.
So I'm going to next assume that the judge goes, no, you're done. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need to see the marshal. This is instantaneously where I just escalate to the marshal because the judge has already made his decision.
Okay.
Right. And I'm going to appeal on the grounds that, again, what clarifies when I'm done making decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean, so this is where it's going to sound this is me advocating here, not saying what is actually true.
Right.
I'm going to advocate that I'm not done making decisions. That simply because my opponent has done something does not mean I was done making decisions. So I've made this statement before. And Knuckles, if you're listening, I'm not saying you did this. This is what I'm going to advocate because I don't know the actual situation.
Sure.
Before Knuckles gets mad because I don't know what actually happened.
Sure.
But in a situation like this, I'm talking to a judge. I'm going to be like, look, my opponent can't roll dice faster than I can spin mods, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Knuckles did that, but I'm going to make that argument. I'm like, I'm not done modifying my dice. Well, you took your dice out of, I was like, sure, but people take dice out of dice boxes all the time. Right? I'm going to start defeating arguments that a judge would say to me, right?
Sure.
Right? Of course I took dice. People, I watch any game, people take dice. It's is that the definition now? Is that written somewhere? I'm not done making dice decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't told him that I'm done.
And
when you said okay, I was but okay is not I see what you're saying, but I'm not okay, what? I'm talking to myself. I've been talking to myself. I'm going to make that argument to the judge. Mm-hmm. When the judge tells me no, I'm not going to like that decision. Right. I'm going to escalate that to the marshal. Now, again, I'm arguing this in good faith. At no point, if you actually had decided not to spin that target lock, I'm not telling you to lie. I'm saying so I just want to be clear because, again, I only know the story as you presented it to me.
Yep. And
So I
something.
just want to be clear, right? Like, so I'm just walking through, like, since you didn't, I would have escalated that under those grounds. And then I'm assuming the judge would have said no. And I'll be like, neat. I'm going to need to speak to the marshal.
Sure.
Because pretty bluntly, I escalate to the marshal. I have already escalated to the marshal multiple times in multiple events.
Okay. So after the fact, just for your own knowledge, I actually did talk to the marshal because of a different event that occurred, because I wanted to know. And I said, so I told him the story from my perspective. And he said, no, you saying okay acknowledges that you are done modifying dice. And here's what I said back to him. And this is how I approach almost every single attack. And I bet you 85% of players do this. When you are done modifying an attack, you usually say, okay, 2 hits or 3 or 1. You know what I mean? Like, there is this is something I do. I do a verbal acknowledgement of, this is what I have. This is my result. And that is my signification as I look at my opponent and I say, okay, 2, 1, I just got 1, or I got 3. Good luck.
All right, so the other thing that I would say here is, like, so I agree. I do agree with that general statement. Like, I also typically use that sort of nomenclature as well, of like, so 2 hits, 1 hit, whatever. Again, this is the reason I do that is I want to be clear to my opponent. It's less about how many, I guess I didn't really think about it. It's clear. I want to be clear about how many are existing, because I like to remove the extra dice.
Yep.
That aren't there. So I like to say 2 hits, 1 hit, whatever. Like, I think other people do that too. It makes it clear that I moved on. And it makes it whatever. So I would also probably make the other statement to the judge. So you're telling me that I left a mod on the table on purpose.
That's a good argument.
I just want to be clear, Judge. You think that I purposely left a mod on the table on purpose?
I'm sure his response would be, well, I don't know what you were thinking. Maybe.
That's fine. But again, the judge can make bad calls, but I'm just going to, like, if I'm advocating for myself, this is how I walk the judge. And I'm like, okay means nothing. Like, okay by itself, hang out. It's like a hanging chad. It means nothing.
Sure.
Right. Like, this is my, like, now again, if I'm the counter opponent, I'm going to argue against you. It's like, he said, okay, like, how long am I supposed to, like, if I'm the opponent, I'm like, how long am I supposed to wait? Like, I might argue against you. Like, he said, okay, but like, if you had said okay before, like, this is how I'm going to talk about, like, the game table. So here's another thing. I might have said, so if you had ever said okay before with another attack, then I'll be like, look, man, he said okay before when like, that's how he signified before throughout the game. That's why I knew he was done attacking.
Sure.
However, if I'm you, if you had been saying 2 hits, 1 hits, I would use that against that argument. See what I'm saying? Like, this is sort of like the board state, where like, I have never said okay as being done attacking ever. I've always been saying 1 hit, 2 hit, whatever. So, but this is, again, like, you've never been in this position. You're nervous. You're on stream. You might not think to make that argument in the moment. This is why sort of having this discussion now and for the audience is useful, so that someone else will think of that. You will think of that next time. If it it may never come up again in your entire history of playing X-Wing. It also may come up completely again, not on stream. Like, right. Like, hey man, I didn't say 2 hits. Like, I'm still modifying dice, because I've had people try and rush me out of decloaks. Right. Like, I'm talking about, so this is the idea of, like, what constitutes, like, when I'm done doing something.
Yep. And that's why I call that out, because I think it is good to build a pattern of behavior, right? Because your opponent's going to function on a pattern of behavior, whether it's how you move your ships, how you take your actions, how you acknowledge you're done setting your dials. It is good to observe those things. In chat has mentioned a little bit about it, and I'm actually going to touch on Catherine's point, because it's kind of something that I do, but not always. So she said, if you're an opponent in this case, I usually recognize the lock on my ship and will point it out to you if you have not used it after a moment. So that's a super nice thing to do that in competitive play I don't recommend, because you have to allow your opponent the opportunity to make a mistake like that. But at the same time, if someone has been like, yeah, I have, let's say we had this instance and I was in Knuckles' position, just from my perspective again, because it's happened to me where someone's like, all right, I've rolled dice, and then there was maybe a confusion and more dice were rolled, and they go, oh, I have a target lock. Can I spend it? And I'll look at them like, yeah, you took that lock. I'm going to re-roll my dice. Now, maybe that's me being overly nice. Maybe that's me being overly kind. But I just always take the approach of like, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. For example, my game against Farmer, when I tabled him, he took an action, and then he said he was done, and I was like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah." So I did some things he didn't expect, and Anakin took a range 3 shot, and I would have did 2 damage because he didn't take a focus. And I looked at him just because it was Farmer, which I normally wouldn't do this. I said, "No, you're gonna take a stress, and you're gonna take a focus, and you're not gonna take any damage this turn." And he's like, "Okay." But that's me being overly nice. So the question always becomes, where do we draw the line of like, what is a healthy way to approach this?
I'm gonna draw a few things here.
Go ahead.
Because you managed to hit on 2 different angles here.
Yep.
So the problem with this is you have now potentially painted Knuckles in a different light. So I'm with Catherine.
Okay.
So here's the way I play. I'm going to remind my opponent they have a lock every single time, period. So you made a statement about you need to allow your opponent to make a mistake. I'm going to allow you to make a mistake by allowing you to potentially overly chase bad variance by spending a lock you shouldn't spend.
Okay.
Right? So when I said I'm going to self-advocate and tell the judge, I'm going to leave a model on the table, that's the thing I might say. That doesn't mean that I should actually spend that lock. We have had this conversation where like, if all you have is a target lock, right, and you don't have a focus, there's plenty of times you should never spend that target lock if you don't have a focus.
Yes, statistically.
But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to advocate like, hey, man, I'm not done, right? I'm not done. I haven't chosen to move past my target lock. But so I'm going to I remind my opponent they have a target lock before I'm done. I'm not going to allow them to like, oops, you missed your target lock. That's not the way I play. However, what you did to Farmer, I
would only do with a friend in a casual.
But I don't think so. I would say that ethically, I think that's great. I think that's wrong, because I think if you shouldn't do that to a friend, because I think 2 things. One, he made a decisional mistake. He chose not to stress. He was making a decisional mistake, and he was wrong. He's allowed to be wrong. And you shouldn't. And I would argue you shouldn't give your friends back things at tournaments.
That's fair.
Or at least I would argue you shouldn't give your friends back things more than other people at tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
How about that? I'm not going to say that you shouldn't give them anything more than you would give anyone else. You should just pat your friends. You should actually just make fun of your friends harder at tournaments for fucking up.
I probably should.
That's actually, I was going to say anything. I actually was going to say, I pat my friends on the back, or strangers on the back harder when they mess up at tournaments. And then I just make fun of my friends because I was like, you should never have done that. I can't give candid advice to strangers because they don't always want candid advice. I wait. If someone asks for candid advice, I give them candid advice, but I don't just give candid advice to people, right? Mm-hmm. I let them complain about their dice. If they want to complain, it's like, sure, man, dice betrayed you. It's definitely not that you turned in when you shouldn't have, or ran away when you shouldn't have, or ran over a rock. It was definitely the dice that did it to you. Right? Like, just let them vent.
Yep.
But that's a separate ethical question, so that's focusing on the decisions that Andrew made. Let's focus on the judging part. I'm not sure a verbal okay is enough based on the so this is where I'm getting at, where I'm nervous. So I agree. Someone in the chat mentioned like it's hard for a judge to make a ruling. I agree. The problem is that the judge, by definition, is going to make a ruling, right? One way or the other, they're going to end up making a ruling. So now they made a ruling that the words "okay" uttered at any point ends dice modification. Is that actually what you want?
Typically,
I don't know.
No. Yeah, I don't think typically.
No. Right? Like, do you see what I'm getting at? Like, that's a weird. So obviously intent is there. So it's just one of those things that, like, if that's why I'm saying like a pattern of behavior is actually far more relevant. Whereas like, what have you guys been using? Like, that's a question as a judge. I'll be like, what have you guys been using to designate that my dice? Well, it's like blah, 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 2 hits. If you've been using the 2 hits, 1 hits, X hits, things as a designation that dice modification is over, okay is not the end of dice modification. If okay has been what you've been using, then okay is the end of whatever's the game, like the tables. So we didn't mention it. I'll go back. So the idea of a cocked die is loosely defined. People think it's clearly defined. It is not, right? It's who's flat or what? No, right? So the idea of a cocked die is basically decided by the two players at the table. The first time it happens, you both look at each other and go, is that die cocked? Right? Someone rolls it. Then you look at their opponent and go, is that die cocked? The opponent goes, yes or no. And you have now set the tone for what constitutes a cocked die.
Sure.
Right? If you have a dice box, you set the first time a die rolls out of the box, or even before it happens, you go, do dice outside of the box count or not? Yes or no?
Yep.
Right? And so then you go, the first time it repeats, and someone goes, well, I rolled 3 of 8s. Well, that die's cocked. No, it isn't. Hey, you just said that die was cocked earlier. No, I didn't. Right? That's the pattern of behavior we're talking about.
Right.
That's when you know someone's in bad faith. That's instantly where I shift my attitude from good faith to bad faith. That's how I start designating someone as a cheater.
Ah, okay. And
because that's the shiftiness, right? Yep. We set a pattern of behavior and you've broken the social contract because we were just playing your game. This is no longer, this was a 50-50 thing. We agreed what is a cocked die. Those are we agreed if a die, like if that evade bounces out of the box, right? And we agreed it only die rolls in the box count. You don't get to keep the evade because it was really convenient when it bounces out of the box. You got to re-roll it in the box.
Yep. And
it sucks. The problem is people see the evade. Oh, I really want that evade. Yeah, you better hope it rolls the evade in the box then, huh?
Mm-hmm. And right? That's like the thing that I do. So I have a little like scum and villainy dice thing. And before every game, I tell them if it bounces out or I don't roll it in, it doesn't count. I will always re-roll it. And sometimes I have to re-roll a die like 5 times because it'll.
Yeah, then it gets funny.
Right. But there was an instance I had too where, and he wasn't trying to cheat, but reactionary. I was ready to roll dice. I was rolling 3 evade dice, and I rolled them on the mat, and I got a bad result. And I went, "Oh, wait! I didn't roll them in the thing. I'm going to roll them in the dice box." And he was like, "But you already rolled." And I was like, "Yes, but I told you before this game started, every single roll I make will be in this box, or it does not count." And I have always stuck to that. So I re-rolled my dice, and I got a better roll. And he was kind of upset. And I'm like, "Look, I told you before this game started, and every single dice roll except for this one, I have rolled in that. I will always roll in that." And later on, he was kind of like, "All right, fine, whatever." And it was like, if I didn't always roll in this, every single roll until this one, because it was just like a quick reaction, okay.
Yeah, but no, that happens. Like, again, people get focused on what they saw versus like that roll never happened. It easily could have been the reverse where you had triple evades
on the mat. Yeah.
And you go, oh, because again, he would have, hey man, you didn't roll it in the box, and you get triple blanks. You know, there it is, right?
Yep.
And again, that's what I'm getting at. Like, so Catherine, like, I do let my opponents make mistakes, but I think it's a difference. It's a different definition of what makes me. I want them to make actual decisional mistakes. I want them to make the wrong decision about spending the target lock or not forget that it exists.
Right, like chasing bad variance.
I want them to I either want them to incorrectly chase the variance. So either they should have spent the target lock and choose not to, or spend the target lock when they should not have done so. Mm-hmm. I want that choice to be the thing, not forget that it exists, right? There's going to be times that I also forget they have the target lock, and I feel bad. Like, it happens. I don't feel terrible, but I feel a little bad. I'm like, oh man, you had a target lock. I feel, man, that sucks. And I forget. But for the most part, I go, did you want to spend that target lock? But I know that I'm like, I have the correct answer. Like, but here's the thing. A lot of times the correct answer is spin the target lock. Don't get me wrong, right? Like, and so I know when I remind them, like, this could end up biting me. But I don't want to win. So this is me. This is the ethics thing going a little bit. We're bleeding into judges and ethics. That's not how I want to win games. I asterisk my own game. Like, if people are just forgetting to spin target, like, how many games did you win if everyone just forgets to take actions against you? I just don't know what that means anymore. But I can't tell you how to play games, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, sure. I agree with, announcing system phases and announcing phases and stuff. I know, this stuff bleeds into different areas. So it kind of depends, right? Like there's no phase for dice modification. It's a little harder. There is a phase for dice modification. I'm done modifying my defense, but it's in terms of conversationally, it's a little more awkward. So like the 2 hits, whatever, is a more a more colloquial way of announcing it versus other things. But again, that's a different, not everyone agrees to that. That's fine. We're talking about the judge interaction. I'm not sure that judge really had thought through what okay means. Cause again, I talk to myself. I also talk to myself when I was like, don't spend that time. All right. Does all right? I say all right a lot. I don't know if I say okay. All right. Does all right in my dice modification? Is that where he wants to go to? Like, that's how I'm going to that is how I'm going to interact with that judge. I'm going to throw all of those arguments at it. I'm going to bombard him with that. And if I'm Knuckles, I'm going to also advocate as Knuckles and be like, hey man, he said, okay. Right. Like he had time. He was looking at the dice. Like how much more time does he have? He said, okay. Like, I'm not sure which one wins there, right? Like I said, I'm not going to try and jump on Knuckles like he was wrong, like the wrong guy here, right? This is about what the right thing on self-advocacy is. And so what kind of arguments should you be armed with moving forth? Definitely still would have advocated moving and escalating to the marshal. Again, I would just say, like, you think I'm going to just like not modify? Like, why wouldn't I spend that target lock? What do you like? Walk me through that decision-making process.
Right. And I think what you're doing is you're arguing in good faith. Like, let's think about this logically. Let's approach this pragmatically. What's a normal behavior you think I would do? And you're talking to that.
Yes.
Yep.
Right. Because, I mean, realistically, you spin the target lock most of the time. Because most of the times, again, chasing bad variants, the target lock's equal to the focus most of the time. Most of the time you spin the focus, right? So at worst, if you're more offensively minded than defensively minded, and you are because you took target lock, you spend the target lock too to just try and do some hits. So like most of the time you spend it. If you're against a hard target, this is where you chase bad variants, right? If you're against a particularly hard target is when you rev up your attack, where you cue the target lock, wait, get the focus, then rev up your hit to do the full double mod. But in most times, if you have the target lock and you got a bad result, you still spend the target lock, just try and hit normally. Because it's equivalent to as if you had taken a focus. By the way, that's the math. Now you know.